Hi everyone, welcome to Digital Studio at Cape Town Conversation. My name is Kekeli Ahiable. I'm a trade and infrastructure advisor at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. And today I'll be moderating a conversation on trade titans, unveiling new pathways in emerging markets. In an era that is marked by unprecedented global shifts and interconnected economies, the dynamics of trade are undergoing a profound transformation. Emerging markets play a pivotal role in shaping the future of commerce, and there's a need to explore the strategies, innovations, and collaborative approaches that are propelling these trade titans towards prominence on the global stage. To help us dig deeper into the topic, I have two excellent speakers, Danny Quah, who's the Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore, and Axel Berger, who's the Deputy Director for the German Institute of Development and Sustainability. I'll just kick us off into the conversation. I'll turn to you first, Danny. Paint a picture for us. How are emerging markets strategically leveraging their unique strengths to disrupt established trade norms and create new avenues for growth? And is this unprecedented, or have we seen it before?
Hi, Kelly. The way the emerging markets today are doing it has lots of similarities with how it's been done previously, but then differences as well. I think the way that emerging markets today can best disrupt the trading system is to think about how, by doing it, they create advantages for themselves. Depending on where they are, what their needs are, how do they do these disruptions in a way that works for them? Now, that's where we lead to the round of similarities. In all cases, everywhere, we're interested in changes that will create jobs, not just jobs, but good jobs, and jobs that will continue to improve over time. And the way in which, through disrupting the trading system, we do that is by asking, what can my people make or do that we can sell to the rest of the world? Now, there's a reason for doing that. That builds advantage for us because often many emerging economies either have markets that are too small or populations that are too poor in and of themselves. So the way in which they can scale up, create good jobs, is by selling to the rest of the world. That's why trade is so important. And they want to sell in a way that even if they start out stumbling, not doing sufficiently well, they can learn over time, that there's learning by doing, or there's improvement in technology. Now, these similarities were what drove East Asia to latch onto, and as you say, disrupt the international trading system 5-6 decades ago. Singapore was then a place with a very small domestic market, so that as it ramped up production, creating good jobs, there was an open question, where was it going to sell all this stuff? Singapore is very small, less than 4 million people, but that same problem plagued possibly the very largest of emerging economies, China, which had a very large population, but a very poor one. Both China and Singapore figured out that by opening up to the rest of the world and accepting foreign investment, but also selling their products to the largest market there is, the rest of the global economy, they will exactly able to leverage these economies of scale, hop onto learning by doing, improve technology, to a point where today, China is the world's #1 trading partner for practically every single economy we can name. Singapore, despite having no natural resources and very little land, has been a manufacturing powerhouse. So I think it is by thinking about those disruptions that the new emerging economies can think about where they should latch onto.
Thank you for that, for sharing these quite distinct but great examples. If I could maybe just turn to you, Axel. Now, the picture that Danny painted for us right now, we can say happened in an era where the rules were quite different in the international trading system. Are the current structures still adequate? And what are the obstacles? What are some of the obstacles we have seen, and how are these new trade titans finding ways to maneuver around them to still achieve transformation in their economies in the area of trade?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, indeed. I mean, I think we are living in a time where trade policy making is happening unilaterally, right? We have a lot of trade protectionism over the past years. We have big countries like China, US, EU, using subsidies in order to promote their industry. So a lot of unilateral policy making, and a lot of people say that the WTO, the multilateral trading system, is in a crisis, right? That's true in a sense. In particular, if you look at the dispute settlement, which is still blocked because the appellate body system is blocked basically by the US. But I would encourage us to look a little bit, on the second tier, and there are a lot of things happening in the WTO. For example, in the area of plurilateral negotiations, so negotiations by a subset of WTO members which come together on a specific topic and drive these negotiations forward. So these plurilateral negotiations have been pursued and driven mainly by industrialized countries in the past. Now we also see emerging markets using these plurilaterals to drive certain issue areas like investment facilitation, an issue where China, Brazil, and other developing countries are really driving this. They have agreed on an agreement in the summer and now trying to implement it. An agreement which is not focusing on tariffs as such, but on frameworks, on rules, on efficiency, transparency, quite interesting. And it also includes a very substantive development provision so that the developing countries can actually implement the agreement in order to benefit from it. Now, the other side of the story is obviously that there are also some emerging markets like India and South Africa, which are absolutely against using plurilaterals in order to negotiate in the WTO. So there's still a conversation to have among emerging markets as well on how to move the WTO forward, but the picture is not as bleak as some observers might indicate.
Danny, would you like to reflect on that?
I thought that was a really interesting description of the way the world is today. This idea that the international trading system has fragmented from those decades back in the model that I described. And that fragmentation is unquestionably real. There are a number of different reasons for this. One is simply geopolitical rivalry, that there are different parts of the world seeking to be in a position of dominance so that they get to write the rules of the game, and they will not countenance competition in that regard. But there's also statements about how in the recent past, international trade competition has been unfair, it's not totally kept to the rules, and there's issues of who's going to win, come out better in this competition. So that fragmentation is real, but while all of that gives us cause for some pessimism, I might say that there's also cause for optimism. There are new market frontiers in the international economy that were not present 50 years ago. The rise of Asia, the rise of East Asia, provides quite a different complexion to how traditionally we thought about emerging economies selling to the advanced economies. Now there's an opportunity for them to sell more to nations that are peers, that are similarly on a developmental journey. And the considerations that will matter for trade will be different. So I would put as a second point in this, the rise of Asia. But then the third point is nuance, and it picks up on many things that Alex has said, in that the nature of trade itself has changed. It used to be you thought about things being made in one point and then taken over to some other point on the earth and consumed there. But now, through the global supply chain, things are made everywhere. Most products have points of origin that encompass a great part of the globe. A second factor is that we've just come out of the COVID pandemic experience. We know that what we need is for global supply chains, this interlocking networks, to be robust against shocks and also to be able to recover if something untoward happens in any single part of the chain, that is to say, to be resilient. Geopolitics has made us averse to risk emerging in different parts of the world. So I think as we move forward, the rise of Asia, which is a clear cause for optimism, but the idea that trade needs to be modulated through considerations of risk, robustness, and resilience will matter more and more. And the emerging economies today will have to navigate that international trade landscape with new lenses to take these considerations into account. But it is still an optimistic picture, is my view.
Okay, on that optimistic note, and as we're here in Africa at the Cape Town conversation, maybe I'll bring my last question to Africa on lessons, as the continent is on this journey to assert itself and create a continental market that facilitates regional integration and changes the story for individual African countries. What lessons can emerging economies in Africa, like South Africa, Egypt, Kenya, Ghana, several others, what lessons can they pick from the mechanisms that these new titans have used to achieve development for their citizens?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Obviously, I'd like to reflect on it from a European perspective, but at the same time, I'd like to say it's always difficult and tricky to compare, such big and complex processes. In Europe, it took ages, decades to come with where we are. It started small. We had a very specific historic moment, right? But still, I think there are a couple of points where we can draw some lessons from the European example. The first one I would say is a big single market is the currency in international trade policy making, right? So it makes a lot of sense for African economies to increase intra-Africa trade, right? It's very low, right? It's 17%, I think, in the European Union. It's much higher. But that gives you also a very different standing in international trade policy making, and that's missing, right? The African voice or African voices are not really there in international trade policy making. The AFCFTA could make a big difference. The second thing I'd like to say, it's not only about tariffs, right? We talk a lot about tariffs in the AFCFTA context, about rules of origin, etc. But it's the European example tells you it's as much about tariffs as it is about creating the frameworks that you need to have in place in order a single market to work. It's about standards. It's about technical requirements which need to be harmonized. It's about setting up the institutions which are, certifying the trade that is happening. So that's also a very important lesson. Yeah, and it takes time. You need to have patience and passion, right? So, yeah.
Danny, any lessons from the ASEAN?
Well, I think there are, but the European example teaches us that harmonization of standards, processes across a diverse set of economies, hugely important. I mean, the African continent, and people out there have to keep telling themselves, it's a whole continent, over 50 different nations, many diverse peoples, and many diverse standards, processes, protocols. I think a certain degree of harmonization would be helpful. That same degree of harmonization was practiced ruthlessly in Europe and is being pushed along in Asia. Lots more to build. But then I might end with a single word, which is infrastructure. It's still hugely important to bring stuff in, bring them from one part of the country to another part of the country. And you do that by having roads, railways, and efficient transportation infrastructure. At the same time, you've got to have infrastructure for production. And for production, what you want to do is to put networks and clusters together. You want to have the idea of special economic zones that will facilitate production clusters of excellence. And I think those things are the lessons I take from both the European and the Asian experience.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Axel. I think this has been good, and we've picked several insights that I think we can unpack, hopefully, beyond this Cape Town conversation. Yeah, that's all the time we have today. Thank you. I've been your moderator, Kekeli Ahiable. Goodbye. Thanks.